Hey, welcome to the Vintage Vibe, where this week you can hear me with a camera from over 10 feet away. And I got one of these little clicky things, which means I could stop and start the video camera and I actually have it on a stand, which means no more T shots. I mean, I really splurged. If that is not a reason for an episode, I don't know what is. But maybe these. So we got a pair of speakers here this week, and I think when I first got them, I called them Splendor. They're Spenders, and I didn't spender a whole lot of money. No pun intended, on these speakers. But we're going to talk about what makes them special, why they've got a following. This is the BC-1, and this certain speaker has a unique kind of background, some innovations, in fact, in a close tie with another certain British speaker, which has become quite, famous in its own right, and an association with a certain facility that's responsible for a show that includes the Stig. So yeah, a whole bunch of things this week. So we're going to look at the speakers. We're going to talk about the speakers. What they cost to buy, what can you expect, if you have to do a restoration on these. Most importantly, how do they sound, and whether or not they deserve a place in your vintage audio collection. Look, clicky thing. The BC-1. Boxy, but good. In fact, Stereophile said that these were so unimpressive looking that they actually found it difficult to connect a pair to give them a listen. However, no. I didn't let looks deceive. In fact, I've listened to them now for over 3 months, and I kind of dig them. In fact, I think these are a music lover's speaker. Maybe not an audiophile speaker, but a music lover's speaker. So let's dig a little bit deeper. Clicky thing. You know what they say about simple things amusing, simple, fill in the blanks. Hey, let's get back to our story. Once upon a time, in a far, far away land, where people drove on the wrong side of the road in small, poorly constructed automobiles where they called the trunk a boot, and headed to pubs to meet their friends to talk about kings and queens while munching on unusual foods like toad in a hole or bangers and mash. Actually, I love bangers and mash. A speaker brand was born. It was the brainchild of two individuals, Spencer Hughes and Dorothy Hughes. Spencer, Spen, Dorothy, Door, Spen, Door. There you go, not to be confused with Splendor. They actually had a co-designer. His name is Dudley Harwood. And for those who have got a pair of Harbeths, you know who he is because he later founded the brand Harbeth. So these speakers, they've got some similar deep roots. Spender's actually coming first and really innovative. In fact, they were the first speakers said to use plastic as a cone material in commercial manufacturing. Now, let me explain. Bextrine, which is this plastic, is actually probably a horrible material on its own because it resonates like hell. It's very flimsy. In fact, when driven hard, it will bend and it will quack like a duck. Seriously. We'll get back to how they solved that problem, but innovative using this new material, later used in other speakers like Celestians. Actually, when you see the woofer on these, you'll see the similarity between some of the Celestians of that time period. They also had a super tweeter in the, we'll call them the production kind of spenders that most people are familiar with in the BC ones, because the early ones actually didn't have a super tweeter. It was added, and it was said to not be added for function, but added so that Spencer Hughes can circumvent tariffs that were put on consumer grade speakers. Now these can be advertised as commercial, professional grade reference speakers, and that they were actually. because the BBC had a total that was set of about 600 of these. And I thought I had a problem in their facility. And they use them for voice reproduction, for music reproduction, even for just kind of the broadcast in general. So the super tweeter, an interesting little fact here was being able to reproduce frequencies crossed over at 13,000 hertz and above. Actually, there's something called a stereo pilot test tone, which is exactly 19,000 hertz that the BBC said they could hear audibly through the Spendor BC1. So they used them to actually make sure they were broadcasting correctly as well. So there you go. The same folks that are responsible for that wonderful TV show, Top Gear, with the stick, right? So those folks had a lot of Spendors, and they must have found them splendid. I better just stop there. Three-way speaker, right? 8-inch woofer, unusual plastic, a Celestion tweeter, and then a Coles 4001 super tweeter. We'll go a little bit more through the construction of these speakers a little bit later. So kind of an interesting background on the speakers in general. And let's kind of take a peek at these things and dive a little deeper. Okay, we got the backs of these off, and you can see right away, nicely constructed. This looks like 1/2-inch thick plywood, and you've got banana terminals on the back, which is not really common speakers of this era. You could even see here little subtle details like where the screws go in. This is actually a metal kind of little insert that's in there. I don't know if I can zoom in close, but you can see it there. And it just makes the screws kind of fit in properly and guides them. Oh, there's the dog. You guys are noisy. Don't be so noisy. Now back to speakers. So on the backs of them, they've got this foam for sound deadening. And you also have, it's hard to see here, but it's a black viscoelastic type material. It feels gummy. And not only is it there, but it's actually down here up against the walls of the speaker as well. In fact, they're relatively thin-walled speakers, even though you get this perception of this nice wood. Let's see if we can get another angle of it here. We almost need a bright light, but that's got this black material up against it there. So interesting. What he was trying to do was push down the cabinet resonances further down the frequency band out of the mid-range and down into the bass regions where it wouldn't be as audible, and then try to deal with that lowest frequencies through some of the dampening, as well as you can see the dampening here in the port as well too. Kind of a different kind of way to do it, and quite innovative again. Okay, so here's the speaker. Now this is a Alnico magnet. You can tell with this kind of metal backing plate bolted into the actual magnet. And the later ones would be ferrite type magnets. So they'd look more like a ceramic magnet. These are the ones to get, in my opinion. These are the ones that mate really nice with tube amplifiers. And the red magnet signifies a change in production. I think the change was, serial numbers above like 13,000 or something like that, where there are higher power handling, so 55 watts. If you have a pair that have a blue magnet, that's the lower power handling version, where the woofer is more prone to quacking. Quack, quack. I'm being honest. Hard to believe. Here is, that was actually loose. That's good, we found that. So these banana type posts tighten down on the cables. There we go, that's good. And we got a nice cast aluminum frame. and you can see the coating on the actual woofer when I get in the light there. That's the plastic, and it's got a coating on it. And that helps prevent it from resonating and sounding odd. Now, there is your Celestion tweeter, and that is the Coles tweeter. Let's see if we can zoom in on it. There you go, Coles 4001. Nicely constructed all in all. The crossovers are decent quality, you can see, right, with the separate coils and capacitors. I mean, these are, really, really nice looking, put together well. Quite impressed. Yeah, and you can kind of see here, just go together kind of as such. Nicely fitting. Okay, so I want to briefly talk about the stands on these speakers. These are the factory Spendor stands and what we call an open mass metal stand. Now we call it open mass because it literally, as you can see, there's nothing between the bottom of the speaker and the floor. The speaker is literally suspended on this type of a stand. And this was an important design consideration, something to consider if you're looking at buying a pair of Spendors or if you've already got a pair. This was critical, as was the tuning of the port, the dampening of the port, the viscoelastic materials inside to control some of the bottom end or the resonance in the bass, because these can be a little bit bass heavy at times. So as mentioned, about 8 to 10 inches, probably ideal height. Put them too low, you're going to suck the life out of these speakers. Get them too high, they'll probably get a little hot, the tweeter. But get it about the ear level or just below the ear level. You'd be quite happy, I think, with them, with the detail and the clarity that these can actually present. Now, put them on a solid stand or put them on the floor, and you're going to be dealing with a speaker that gets a little bass heavy and a little boomy, as I discovered when I tried them on a solid bass type stand. What can you expect to Spendor for a pair of Spendors? I'm so funny. Canadian dollars, 2025, between about 700 and 1,000 would be reasonable if they were a good example. Alnico drivers. Now, we'll talk about some things to look out for, but generally speaking, the Alnico drivers are going to be the more desirable of the bunch. Blue magnets or red magnets. Red magnets will probably bring a premium because of the higher power handling. So you could be $1,000 to $1,200 for a good set. Now, I can't tell you much about the ferrite magnet versions, the later ones, but I'm a big fan of Alnico magnets, and that's where I'm going to maybe try to steer you towards, because I think they retain more of the original voice of the speakers. What to look out for? The earlier versions, so blue magnets, they used a PVC surround instead of a rubber surround. So you'll know it's PVC because it's got a white surround, and they are known to shrink. So that can be a problem, a shrinking surround. The red magnets are a rubber surround. Just keep an eye out for the surround. Is it chalky white? Does it look just nice and black and supple? Is there any cracks in it? And you're going to have to take the backs of the speakers off to get a view of them, because most of these have got permanently fixed front grills, so you're not going to get a view of them. The good news is the backs aren't sealed. Bring a screwdriver when you go along, take a look at a pair, and you'll easily get in to take a look at them. So that's, I think, important. And then just making sure everything looks as it oughta. Nothing's been mucked around. It's got the Celestion driver for the tweeter. It's got the Coles Super tweeter. The crossovers look original, look intact. All the wires look good inside them. And, the inside foam isn't all deteriorating and stuff like that. I'd say that's important too. Now, as it goes for the wood on these, because it's a real wood veneer, aside from big dings in them, I wouldn't be too concerned about them needing to be refinished, because just a light sanding, like I've show you here in a few pictures, maybe an afternoon, a couple hours, and you get these things looking, really good again, like I did with mine. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Now let's go into how these sound. So how do they sound? I mean, they look like just a whole hum old-fashioned speaker. Let's just call it as it is. I was pretty surprised. I hooked them up first to a solid state amp. It actually was a Bryston. Interestingly enough, I had them at the same time as I had the Brystons that I did the reviews on. And then I later hooked them up to a tube amp, a 300B, which I really liked how they sounded with the tube amplification. Either way, they sounded good. So you're fine with solid state as well. Tonally, they're very pleasing. I'm not going to say they're perfectly tonally accurate because they do have some little bit of emphasis in the bottom end. You got to be kind of mindful, again, the right stands, have them positioned properly in the room in order to reduce some of that bottom end. But the mid-range on these well makes up for it. They have some of the most accurate, natural sounding mid-range I've heard in any speaker ever. They are very, interestingly enough, they're very taut and they're pretty quick in how they reproduce their detail. They just come across very natural, particularly that mid band, which is most of what you're really listening to. The high frequency has just enough air, just enough extension, and man, I just absolutely adore these speakers. I'll give you a couple more detailed examples of what I was hearing next. Okay, so some final observations of how they sound. I'm going to go a little deeper. So we had a solid state Marantz 2230. Now it's not some syrupy old Marantz receiver. This one is fully restored. So it's a great example of a low wattage capacitor coupled solid state unit. First thing I noted, very first thing, mid is very natural and transparent. That was a reoccurring theme I think you'll find here. Now, the timbre and the delicacy or the delicate nature of the mid-range was exceptional. Now, when I was listening to some Diana Krall, I marked down here, great depth, emotion, never fatiguing. Now, that's pretty good because I've listened to some Diana Krall on a bunch of different speakers. And sometimes, you know, when she's really going at it, the voice can be a little bit peaky. This was all very composed with a surprising level of transparency and detail. Now, I did notice the bass at times could be a bit heavy, especially if you touched any of the tone controls, you boosted the bass a little bit, or you touched the loudness. Now, this was being tested on the solid stands. When I went to the open stands, the open metal stands, the bass became more taut, more natural, more rhythmic. The speakers really, really like to be played at lower volumes. And in fact, I noted the detail at lower volumes was A+. Imaging was nicely centered with a good soundstage and good depth. Now, when I position them a little bit higher up, I can understand why some people say, you know, they can get a little hot. The tweeter can be a little energetic. But you get them in that sweet spot right at the ear level or just below, right on. Now, here's an example of where they did get a little bit bright. So the horns on Brigham Phillips Big Band, that's what the track or the CD's called. And I mean, it really sounded like a big band was in the room. It's a more progressive recording, this one. The track Lush Life, Mike Murley's tenor sax, could be a bit hot. Now, particularly if your room is bright, you'd really notice it. The mid, though, was very good at becoming, or kind of holding its own, not becoming muddled, particularly when the band got going. Each instrument continued to hold its place in space. The crescendos were tight and accurate. The guitar had great texture in a realistic or spectacular realism is what I marked down here. Again, back to Diana Krall, her piano, because she's got some good piano tracks or some good songs with the piano. I marked down it was spot on, tonally accurate. Some of the best pianos I've heard ever reproduced by speakers. Piano is difficult to get right on speakers. This was really impressive. Overall, easygoing, relaxed sounding, like a good old friend, essentially becoming a audio companion the more you listen to them and the more you live with them. Now, I brought them upstairs, wondering if things could get better, put them on a 300B in this room here, which is more treated. And I noted listening to Struttin' with Some Barbecue. This is a song that probably best known would be Oscar Peterson. I think, no, actually not Oscar Peterson. This would be Louis Armstrong. So Struttin' with Some Barbecue. The drums on it were tight. They were dead accurate. They were fast. They were grooving. Now, I'm a drummer, so I can really appreciate well reproduced drums. And in this case, like the splash cymbal on that track was perfectly represented. The perfect decay and amount of resonance. It would trick you that there was someone playing drums there in the room. I marked down here, masters of being tonally balanced at low volumes. Natural, zippy, and tight. Drums never cease to amaze me. The snare sounded so right. The resonance from the drum skin being hit with the drumstick was spot on. And they were starting to become one of my favorite all-time vintage speakers. So, do they deserve a place in your vintage audio collection? Well, only you can answer that. But for me, these are kind of becoming like, I don't know, favorite pair of jeans, right? Favorite pair of slippers. I mean, these are the speakers that you come back to when you just want to enjoy the music. Thanks for joining us here on The Vintage Vibe. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week. And I get to play with my clicky thing.